Welcome to the Dance Centre podcast. I am your host, Claire French, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I'll be talking to dancers, choreographers and other members of the dance world here on the West Coast to find out more about their creative work and practices and to discuss what it means to us to be dance professionals today. Thanks for joining us. Freddie Opoku-Addaie is a British-born Ghanaian performer and educator and the recipient of many choreographic awards and commissions that has won him critical acclaim. After London Contemporary Dance School and the California Institute for the Arts, he became an apprentice for Company Wayne McGregor. His choreographies use disparate movement styles, folkloric themes, and structured choreography. He worked as a freelance performer with Canduco Dance Company. He's been an associate artist of the Royal Opera House, ROH2 London, and the founder, director, and curator of Systems Lab, working with multifaceted mid-career artists. Appointed in 2021 as Dance Umbrella's new artistic director and CEO, Freddie is the first Black artist to hold this post. Anthea Lewis has been in the creative sector for over 20 years, covering various roles and continuing to build her resources to expand her palette. Having started as a performer, working in contemporary dance and physical theatre, she simultaneously began building her skill set in arts management and producing. More specifically, she's interested in artistic growth and developing an understanding of the business aspects of the arts. Her work is invested in developing artistic practices, augmenting underrepresented voices, and cross-art form collaborations. Anthea is now carving out her own pathway under the Blue Lily projects to create individually tailored artistic curations. Both Freddie and Anthea have explored many creative outlets for their dance and movement creations, and I'm delighted to speak with them on their multifaceted approaches to dance creation and ways of engaging with dance for spectators, audiences, community, and other dance artists. So I just want to welcome Freddie Opoku-Addaie and Anthea Lewis to the podcast this month. I'm very excited to speak to both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think this will be really lovely to get some insight, background into the two of you, but also into your relationship with Vancouver now that you have a little one. It's growing. So first of all, let's just find out a little bit about both of you. So Anthea, you are the curator of Dance in Vancouver this year, and Freddie invited you into the process and handed this role over. So let me start with Anthea. Can you just give a little bit of your background, basically as a dance artist, dance maker, producer, curator, as you both are, just a little bit that you'd like to share with our listeners about some of your projects and some of your roles right now.
Sure.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'm a movement artist. I am a producer. I'm a curator and a facilitator, multitasking like most of us these days. I am based in London. I'm from London, and I kind of fell into contemporary dance. Like I think dance was a massive outlet for me as a child, and I think just everything creative, music, drama, like everything, but more kind of physically engaging or connecting to the body, I think. And that just kind of continued to be a path that I followed. And then I really worked only as a freelance dancer. So I was really already kind of on this independent freelance route, not specifically by choice, but just maybe that suited who I was and the way that I operate. I think, that was maybe starting to show quite early that I liked variety. I liked quite a range of working with different styles, different types of people. And so I'd already led down the path of kind of freelance performer, but then as with most freelance artists, juggling a lot of other things as well, other jobs that are partly income-based, but also the work we're doing is very like multi-dimensional in terms of the roles we're taking on, even if it's not officially noted that you're also the lighting designer, the costume designer, the dramaturg, the producer. You're just having to turn your hand to these different things as you go.
Yeah, I think there's a great thing around that for not only do you kind of learn by default all of these different things, but vision, choreographic vision or like artistic vision starts to come from that, doesn't it? So you start to recognize it in other people's works too, I think. I think that's really cool. Thank you for that. I'll kind of stop you there for the moment. Sure. And let's open it up to Freddie. You are, as Anthea was saying, a dance maker, choreographer, you've been a freelance artist and a professional dancer in many scenarios. So, I mean, I probably just answered the question for you right
Great.
there.
Next question.
There you go. And moving on. No. But out of all of that, and maybe a little bit, as Anthea said, like, when did this start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that sense, there might be some similarities we can speak to. Being born in East London, there's some amazing artists that have come through East London, but there's also, with many challenges, just like for most people it is as well. Resourcing access is something that's always been a bit restricted. But, I was born in East London, lived in Ghana from 4. My parents took me back to Ghana and West Africa from 4 till 10. And then when I came back in East London, so straight back and forth. So that perspective was really important to understand the multiplicity. And I think that was really enhanced curiosity for just other types of cultures, because I knew there was others. It wasn't just what was existing in my bubble of East London. And I think East London is so rich as well. There's many, ethnicities, communities. I'm not saying London is perfect, but for the richness, it's definitely, you can feel it. And then we also had an amazing teacher when I was at college, System College, a dance teacher, Claire Connor, who's now actually the chief executive at The Place. So back in the day, she was the dance teacher there, and we had a range. And I think this really comes back to my curiosity for multiplicity of voices. We were working with contemporary dance companies, but also contemporary dance companies that were focused on integration, contemporary dance company focusing on forms that was outside of the Western canon. So it was a range of many things. So it wasn't just, oh, this is East London, let's just do specifically cater to this. It was really a wide range. And that was in a conversation with East London Dance, which was a kind of a dance agency activation for local communities. And we had some amazing. Actually, one of the animators that would come and work with us in his early days was Wayne McGregor. So he would do a lot of work in that area as well. So a lot of artists have really come through that. Kenneth Tharp, who used to be an ex-dancer in London Contemporary Dance Theatre, Arc Dance Company used to come to our college, Bullies Ballerinas, Lindy Hop Dance Company, VTOL. There was a range of work that wasn't specifically speaking to a dance form. It was about choreographic thinking across a range broad. And that got my curiosity, because actually I was interested in football. So, and then after that, auditioned for The Place and the London Contemporary Dance School, which is in central London. The rest happened after that. Yeah.
I love it. Just to draw on that, when Wayne got the job as the dance animator in East London, I just worked with him because I went to the same college as him. I went to Bretton Hall, and I was just a couple of years after him. So that crosses paths with me. And all of the companies you mentioned, I also was extremely inspired and influenced by, and they are reasons why I stayed in the industry too. And I worked at The Place for a while. So our paths cross so much, and I love hearing all of these things. I love it.
I think it's really generational, because those names, it was a real period of time. And I also had one of my initiations into contemporary dance with very early stage Wayne McGregor random dance that, engaged through a youth dance company. And so it's just look at the importance of those kind of community dance, activities that are sometimes just tied to funding requirements, but actually how integral they are and how they can really reach people that maybe don't ordinarily have access to those kind of activities.
I love that, because the other thing that I was just thinking when I was reading about both of you and getting some more perspective on that was, and this will come up a lot, I think, in our conversation, but being in London, like you've already said, Freddie, like you said, Anthea, you're surrounded by so many different inspirations and people and cultures and diversity. And it's not, the work that gets created is not separate to that. It's actually driven by that to a certain degree. And I feel like there's something about understanding that communities create, that we make work in communities and with communities and for communities, and that's such a huge part of art making. And sometimes I think it can be divided, like you said, categorized, compartmentalized into funding, criteria or strategies. And actually, we're just communities creating or trying to find ways of creating as different communities and expressing those communities. And I think that's really, I think both of you have done that. Freddie, when you mentioned the football, it made me think of Lift, the project you did in Lift in 2014, I think it was. Was it there's Turf. A video of it? Turfed. Yeah. It was in the Lift Festival, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. And that was something I was invited as a movement director. But just speaking to your point, and currently, definitely in London and in the UK, there's been a big cut in those kind of community engagement and the kind of access points through schools and colleges with the performing arts. And that's something that's a real shame, because there was a real fight. I mean, I remember the mid-1990s, I'm giving away my age now, where like the idea of community was like a bit of a dirty word for the high art kind of practitioners. Ooh, community, we don't do that. But there was real art, not real artists, but there was an integrity that those who were participating for whatever reason can create art like the ones who've done 10,000 hours, but it's a different type of aesthetic. It's different tastes. And I think it's a shame, because that's what I think is more in the conversation, definitely from my observation in London and generally internationally as well. There is more of that conversation of participatory work, not necessarily community. Because, I mean, as I say to most of my friends, I trained how to dance. I'm not saying I was the best dancer anyway, but I was learning how to be able to do the things I wanted to do without getting injured, because there's a lot of repetition when you're in rehearsal. So for me, technique and going to school was partly that. For me, reflecting back, was to learn how to do the things 155 times without necessarily doing it once and hurting myself. That was really important to be able to do that, like any kind of professional role as well. And I think that's what the art form practice, if you go into the institution or some kind of a vocational training, that's what that enhances. But artistry, I think, does go beyond just the studio, because actually we draw from that as well. So it's just really important to just acknowledge that the work that I'm interested in is really not being ignorant to that space as well, in a way where, and I do sometimes have to just observe when that conversation comes up about what's the professional work and what's not, and who's deciding that is really important. I think that's something that's definitely been ingrained from the get-go. It wasn't like, let's jump on a tick box or let's jump on a funding bandwagon, because there was a period of that when everyone would do a community project or an education project just to get their funding.
Absolutely. I completely 100% agree with you. And I think it is an international, universal, global issue, problem, like misunderstanding. And also I want to bring that back to, okay, this is going to feel like a little bit of a weird segue, but how do you two know Mirna Zega, Executive Director of the Dance Centre? Because when we talk about communities, we're now talking about London and Vancouver in a kind of relationship. How maybe did that come about? And then how did the being invited to be curators for DIV come about? Freddie, can you start this?
Yes, but I'll keep it short because it goes back a bit as well. But I know Mirna because actually we met as part of this program, Curatorial Rome, which was a group of European organizations, and Mirna with a Zagreb, I forgot the institution, dance platform hat on. Yeah, that was great. So we was in that conversation, and each country selected a few artist makers to be part of this kind of roaming group of artists across Europe. So that's how I initially met Mirna, and a conversation actually came up that we shared some similarities in our early years of growing up, because she also grew up partly in Ghana as well, which is partly where I went back to when I was younger as well. So that was some kind of a connection as well, the multiplicity of spaces we exist in. And just to go back to that point about community and the languages that's mostly outside of the Western canon, there is no distinction between professional and community in dance forms and the practices. So that's something I think definitely is a connection there already. But and then just to make a long story short, we met again actually in, when did we meet? 2019? No, it must have been earlier. 16, 17 in Bassano da Grappa. And Anthea was part of a program that we actually cultivated, which was Systems Lab, which fed into my curatorialship period with Emma Gladstone, who passed away recently, who is the former artistic director of Dance Umbrella. Wonderful, Emma. Yes, and she invited me to be a guest programmer, and great opportunity. But I also realized that it needed other resourcing. So Systems Lab was set out to support peers, makers like Anthea's and vice versa, to really just have a more of a dialogue between peers. And then we ended up partly supporting Anthea to attend Bassano da Grappa Festival. And Mirna was also there. And then a conversation started about practices and things as well. And that was left. And the rest, I'll let Anthea carry on with that. Yeah, so that's how we kind of met.
Wonderful. Thank you. Over to you, Anthea.
Yeah, it's just making me think a little bit about, because we're already talking about kind of community and in terms of like, I guess how it used to, this community work, but I guess it's all really community building, not just as in we're working with members of the public, but even within, our, as Freddie was saying, our peers and our colleagues and other people in the sector and other people in different sectors. Like it's all just looking at ways to kind of make contact, and I don't mean contact as in network contacts, but just like human contact with other people and have a moment of sharing something. And I think from the systems lab that Freddie curated, there's been so many things that have sprouted out of that. And it's those moments that are maybe not so clearly defined. You know, there were definitely workshops and activities, but there was also these like in-between moments that exist of you're having conversations, like personal conversations, private conversations, or just, you know, you're walking from one venue to another and you're just talking, and it's these overlaps that happen that like plant a seed for a relationship to begin to develop. And that's, you know, really how Freddie and I have grown to kind of work together and have other people who kind of sprout from that systems lab, who we still continue to be like weaving in and out of interactions. So after Bassano, Freddie was pretty much an ambassador for B-Motion Festival in Bassano, and he would tell everyone who would listen or like practically chase you down the street saying, you need to go to this, you need to experience it. So it was really wonderful that he also found a way to help facilitate for people to get there and you know, kind of be looked after in those spaces. And it was, it's a great like place of people coming together from different parts of the world and just making contact with people and finding out who's doing what in, you know, certain spaces. I don't think I'd been in those kind of interacting with people in that way. I think especially having been a performer, and as I kind of transitioned into producing more, it was a very different like circle of people involved. And then I went another year and Freddie kind of drew Myrna and I together, as in like there's this opportunity for him, I guess, to be involved with the dance centre and Dance in Vancouver, but then offering it as a space and a platform for me to kind of, again, coming back to being a freelance independent curator and producer, to have this opportunity to take on this role. And it's like, how do you get access if someone doesn't kind of guide you or show you where the door is? Where's the door? How do I get into those spaces? How do I get these opportunities?
Absolutely. And I want to pick up on that a little bit, because I feel very much with the two of you that your openness to opportunity and to conversation and to possibility is just immense. It's just so generous. And I feel like there's something that it's in that space of it's like between, it's not easy to define even for me in terms of how you two have kind of developed your relationship, and how, Freddie, you've handed this over to Anthea, and how that it just seems kind of organic and it seems like it's a natural evolution, but there must be something else going on in terms of your connection, curatorial kind of jiving or vibing or something that makes you two kind of, that Freddie, that meant that you could hand this over to Anthea. Could you talk a little bit about your process with DIV in the curatorial sense, what you discovered maybe along the way, and how you've chosen to curate DIV?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll let Anthea speak to that, but we had a conversation earlier on regarding the handing over, and for me, it's not quite the word. I think it was just felt natural that Anthea should hold this space for this conversation, and it wasn't regardless of currently my position, Dance Umbrella, because that's something we're also thinking about, is about other curatorial voices to really widen the conversation and the multiplicity of what contemporary conversation is. And I think it's just really, it was very easy. And actually, I remember, Anthea always said this, she programmed this amazing platform called Untamed, which happened in London, and then actually speaks to what partly a conversation that she's having with her artists and their venues, like artist-led venues in Vancouver. But this one was led by two actually artists, and it's called Trip Space, and is in Haggerston in London. And she curated this brilliant platform, Untamed, of all female artists' work. And I watched that going, damn, all right, that's some serious work there. And for me, it went, the term I tend to use is the beyond the three T's. It wasn't tokenistic, it wasn't being a tick box, and it wasn't just being, let's tolerate this artist. It was really pushing the conversation about these makers. And some of these makers, I'm not going to name all of them because I'll probably forget one of them, but all of them are now doing amazing things with all the venues. And Anthea spotted and brought all those people together and curated that and produced that. And this was 2015. So this was, around that time, there was a big conversation about, and then after that about, the tick box of who's in a conversation, who's not. But Anthea was already ahead of the game. And that was really inspiring. So it was naturally that conversation that was also happening with what Myrna was discussing. And I was thinking, why not? So there was already ground rules that already been set, and understanding or getting a sense and palette of what Anthea is interested in. And I think this thing about community is that Anthea is brilliant at doing that. I know some of the is not just what happens in the theatre, the traditional black box, but some of the events that she curates in her own home, like in other spaces as well, bringing people together. And as she says, those spaces is where the real conversation happens, like to really get down in a polite way, cuss each other out, have opinions, and then eat together. And then suddenly you might be working together or not. It's just, so that's so important, I think, for really shifting the narrative of who has these conversations, because not everything is done with just going to studio and having an R&D. It's not. There are other ways to do R&Ds, or to initiate R&Ds. So yeah, it just felt very natural. There wasn't a pass. I was like, yeah, Anthea should do it, because actually we're interested in working as a curator, a dancer brother. She's already actually done things with in Emma's tenure as a curator. She's curated events at the Young Vic. Yeah, so it's not as if this is something like new. It was just it was just timely, the next phase of this collaboration that, we're building on. So, yeah.
So that's beautiful. Anthea, how are you holding the space? How are you running with this role? Like, what would you like to add?
Freddie's very generous and humble, and it really does require someone to advocate for you. Like, Myrna's lovely, but she still holds an important role and is, looking after this dance space and this community, and she doesn't know who I am. It's great that we've met. We had, a short conversation over breakfast for like 2 minutes, but in order for like me to even be taken into consideration, it does require someone to say like, I support this person. I believe that they have the capacity, that they're capable, and it's like almost relying on Freddie's judgment as well, to like Myrna's trust in that, because she trusts his judgment. And so of course, once you get in the door and you have that conversation, you can develop a rapport of your own and start to discover what can work, what can't work. But it's still, you need that guidance in. And I like to offer that to others as well, because I've learned from my own personal experience how important it is. Like, all the best jobs I've ever got my whole life have been word of mouth. Someone's recommended me. All the times that I interview have always just been like, something was just not quite, but the recommendations are always like, it just flows better. And it's also just been great to have Freddie there, like as guidance, but he also allows a lot of room, like a lot of space for you to kind of find your own footing. There's not like, he's not micromanaging. He's not telling me this is how he would do it or this is how it should be done. He's just like, when I need him, I know I can turn to him, or when I need to bounce an idea around, or I need to like ask something, it's just lovely to know that support is there. And obviously the team at the dance centre as well have been very like open. This is an experimentation, so they've not had someone like me in this role, in terms of I'm a freelance artist and I come to this without kind of an organisation supporting me. And so that's a whole different setup to someone who has another, stable income to support them while they're doing this. So we've had to all like look at what's possible with this, how we're able to adapt it. I think I'm quite big just in general on like questioning the setup of systems and things. And even if they're working, I just want to be like, oh, what if we try this? Or what about this? Or why do we do this way? Because I think it's always worth reviewing like how we're doing things, the models we're using, what's working, what's not. And, things might need to evolve at some stage. So even if it's kind of going really well, we can still like reassess things and see if there's opportunity to improve.
Do you find that presenters and artists equally are open to this notion? What do I mean by this notion? That they're open to things being either presented or created with outside of the idea of an institution, or the idea of like partnering with artists as opposed to presenting artists? Are you finding that? Are you finding that as an independent curator, it's easier for you to have those conversations, both with where these things might be experienced with an audience and also with the artists who are creating the work themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more discussions happening around it and exploration. I feel like people are attempting to explore like how else these can be done. How can we support people that are maybe not working in traditional ways? Because I think there's just more and more people that aren't kind of in, just in general, not even in the arts, but, we're in a world now where we've got 0-hour contracts and you don't have jobs for life anymore. And it's just like everyone's having to like rethink how we look at our work lives and our careers and financial stability and all these things. And I think the pandemic probably, made us have to really hone in on that for all of us, like how precarious we all probably felt in that period. So I think there's lots of conversations, but I think when it comes to, it's risk taking, and I think some people are a bit more tentative about trying things out or making changes than others. And I understand that there can be repercussions to like failing at high stakes, to failing with big money involved, or like with things that feel very visible. And we're now in a climate of like everyone's got social media and voices, and so there's a certain level of like self-censoring sometimes going on, and a caution with like thinking about how we're presenting to the outside world, but also like the fundamentals of how we're really able to shift and adapt, and like with the world that we're in today.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say your priorities for Dance in Vancouver and the program are becoming? Like, is it like conversation, risk taking and experimentation, or is it about, I mean, it can be all of them. Is it about helping people see the diversity of the community as much as possible? I mean, or what are the challenges you're also facing with curating Dance in Vancouver? Challenges and kind of new insights, maybe.
I mean, I think, I already come to it in it's a new kind of experience for me, this idea of coming in as a guest curator. And I as much as I felt it was an exciting opportunity, it was also a slightly strange concept to me. Like, I'm going to curate something in this community that I don't know. And it just felt initially like, oh, how does this work? What do I do? Like, what does this look like? So I guess I initially just felt like it was important to feel that I was discovering the community, hearing the community, feeling the community, like feeling, all the kind of nuance of it, as well as like the direct conversations that are happening, but trying to get a sense of like what's the vibe here, and what are the different kind of layers of conversation that are taking place. And so I kind of tried to make an effort to meet with people and talk with people and listen to like what matters to people within the dance community here, and what does this space represent to them, as something that is kind of reoccurring. What resource does it offer to this dance community and to the wider community, and how is it serving the people here, and what's the goal with this? What are we hoping to do or trying to achieve? And so I guess there was, a sense of, we want to platform local artists, but we want to bring people from internationally from around the world to experience like what's happening within the city of Vancouver or wider British Columbia. So there's already a sense of like a shared experience, or wanting to expand or connect more with people from the outside. And I think as much as it's about reaching presenters and programmers, I was also thinking about like as well as kind of the idea of meeting people who work in roles that kind of could maybe potentially lead to touring or expanding their opportunity to perform their work. I just thought, well, it's just equally as valuable to just meet other creators and creatives around the world as well. So I just think the focus and goal of aiming at programmers and presenters just felt like it needed to be expanded, and we could just like focus on like, how can we just connect with other people? That's not the only network that we want to develop as an artistic community. How can we expand that? And I think, there was a lot of discussion around how Vancouver is slightly kind of isolated, even though it's part of Canada, but there's something very specific, and it exists in its own kind of pool slightly. And although like London, of course, is very an international city and, cosmopolitan, we're also no longer part of the EU, and we're also like, the UK is an island. So there's some sense of like, we're very interconnected, but there's still some kind of isolation in some way. And I think that parallels very much Vancouver. So I was curious about examining like, what is that kind of, what is that to exist within something where you are quite interconnected, whether locality or in terms of commerce, but still feel a sense of being slightly removed from other things around you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say one aspect of that I felt moving from London to Vancouver, and having been in Vancouver for quite a long time now and back and forth, is there's a different level of integration. I mean, I'm completely immersed in the arts world in Vancouver, but I know many people who even live in my building who have never seen a dance show, never been to the theatre. It blows my mind that is even possible because of course in my life, I don't go a day without it. But I feel like in London, that's of course going to still be the case, because the arts is not the only way to express oneself or be involved in community, as we've talked about. But I feel like it's somewhat, perhaps sometimes a little bit more isolated, and it's like there are artists who do this thing and there are people who go to see arts events, but I felt very much like a bigger division in Vancouver than I ever felt in London. I think that might also be partly because it's just quite a bit smaller. So, if I'm able to walk to work and not get on the, and not commute across London to do something, I'm not commuting across town. It's different. But I just wanted to share that because I do feel like I miss sometimes the integration of the arts that I feel when I'm in a city like London, and especially in London. I miss that here. I'm not sure if you felt that in Vancouver, or if even had time. But what I do want to draw on a little bit is, Freddie, with you and with taking over Dance Umbrella and your relationship with Dance Umbrella, you've come into something that's been quite established and have obviously been able to leave your mark. And you came in supported, as you've supported Anthea in this process, but it's not guest curation in the same, I mean, it's like year upon year, as long as you want to be there, it's your job, right? So maybe curatorially, could you talk a little bit about what that's given you? I think, have you done just one so far as the artistic director, or is it more than that?
What is it? It's like officially, I think this would be the third proper album, because the first one in 2021 was pretty much March, but I was still lecturing at university, 0.5 lecturer at University of East London. So once again, as a freelancer, you try to navigate as many spaces. And actually, I was doing that as well when I was guest programming. But speaking to that, I mean, what is the saying? You're only as good as your last album. So every year is pretty much, and I mean, I don't know, and not to make any judgment on any artist directors or previous artist directors, but I think there's also things have shifted, and there's only a certain amount of period of time. And I'm going to say out loud that you could be in this position, and if you don't get what you need to get across within a certain period of time, I think there's no reason to be in that position. And I think things have also shifted, because I'm not sure how often is that you have a freelancer that's in a full-time role. I mean, I keep on saying to people that I've only recently started to pay off my student loan after finishing training in 2002. So it's I literally just started paying for it about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's one of those things where it's the other way around, that usually you go from a full-time job to become a freelancer or consultant in that way as well, instead of freelance coming into this position, or is not as 20 or something years of experience before you go into these roles. So I am aware it is a very privileged position, but also knowing that there needs to be other voices that's really agitating a conversation within a festival. Hence, there is this conversation regarding the curation of what Anthea is doing in Vancouver. That's pretty much in place. You'll speak to that. Something, iteration of that coming to DU as well, because there need to be other voices in the curation of the festival. And as myself and Tanya Wilma, our co-chief executive and executive director, looking at Dance Umbrella's working towards its 50th anniversary, whether I'm there or not, in 2028, is really about having more multiplicity of voices in curation for the festival, because I don't think it's enough for any international established arts festival or art form specific festival to just have one voice to say this is the palette of it all. I think there's nuances, and those nuances have to be kind of tailored for. It's not one shoe fits all. So it's really important to have those conversations. So it's very much in the thinking, because as Anthea speaks, I was also given that opportunity. Emma saw me curating something, and then so someone gave me an opportunity, and Emma saw that, and she's like, "Oh, Freddie, I'd like to invite you to come and work with me as well." So I think it's also really important that becomes a part of the festival conversation once again, which wherever the festival is, but especially for a festival that's 46 years old, going towards its 50th. It's not just about presenting international works. It's not for me, that does not excite me. It's about the multiplicity of thinking about how artists, curators are thinking about how we watch the work, where we see it, what conversation is happening around the works, what food, is eaten around the work, what drink. It's just, it's like going to a Michelin star restaurant. There's a whole experience. So that experience, and that's what festivals are. it's a moment and happening, then it really should challenge all the palette sensibilities in that moment, because it's only a short window of time as well. It's different what a venue does because they do a cycle, but a festival really should agitate that conversation. And I also need to get agitated because myself have with Anthea, we have conversations and peers as well, and you need that. I mean, it's not always nice,
yes,
but that's
absolutely.
but it needs, at least you hear it instead of going afterwards, someone telling you, and you're like, really? Now you're telling me. Like,
yeah,
but at least
exactly.
you're informed in your decisions, kind of go, well, you're doing this and this is what this could mean. And you go, all right, yeah, I am. But then I will find a way to have that conversation if it comes up. And I think festivals really do operate in that way as well.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Freddie, you wanted us to maybe get into a little bit more of the curation around DIV and open that up for Anthea to talk about that. Is there more you'd like to say, Anthea, around the purpose or what would it be? I think what you were saying, Freddie, it's around what you can, almost like it's the wrong word, but almost like what your agenda is as a curator. Or, I think maybe you could speak to that.
And also, it's something regarding like the spaces, the artist-led spaces, but also that generosity that Anthea also has in that way of them curating who is in their space, who is in the conversation. It totally reminds me of the work that Anthea did with Untamed as well, being invited to work in a space and inviting artists to bring in some conversation as well. So it'd be good, to hear.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that, because that's something I'm also really super passionate about myself and instigating things like that for my own development as an artist. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I think like the framework of how DIV exists, and as I said, me coming in, I felt it was a strange role, and I really wanted to like avoid coming in to kind of layer on what I feel should happen, because it's like I just don't know the people well enough. I don't know the work well enough. I don't know what needs to be said here in this part of the world. And so I think it was really important to feel like I was curating it with the artists and maybe just offering like propositions or ideas that, could just be thought provoking, could be rejected, could be something that's absorbed, like just something to help, like, together we're bouncing back and forth of ideas and ways of like how can we shift this format. And my initial thing was like, I don't want anything to happen inside the dance center. Like, let's take it all outside. Let's remove it from this context completely. That like in the conversations it's great, and then some artists were like, actually, I really need a theatre space and I really want some lighting. It's like, it's great that we could be outside in, on a street corner, and like if the work dictates that, but some people like really did. And I think it's that conversation to I can get very excited and have ideas and offer things that I think would be great, but I think it's important like to look at how that feeds into what's happening and what exists already. So it's not just, I had this very like weird sense of like this, it could be a very like funny, like Britain and Canada having that British kind of colonial aspect. I don't want to be like, I've come in to like bring everything from London of all these things we're doing. I'm going to teach you all locals what we're doing. Like, I just had a sense that I don't want to like come in this way that feels slightly like colonialistic, and I wanted to really make it be a dialogue, and like, what do you feel like we need, what do you want to say, and how, like, what does this space provide for you? It's great that I want to shake it up and I want to focus on other things, but some people really want to connect with programmers and producers from other places to really like see if they can expand their work and have more further opportunities. So it's like it really serves a purpose, and I had to remember not to kind of just reject like the basic premise of what it is. It is, it doesn't, we could call it a meat market in terms of the basic concept of what it's there to do, but I think it's then how you like shape things with it and around it that like maybe can make it a bit more artist focused and like in terms of serving their needs as well.
I think that's wonderful, because it does feel very much like artist led, like literally, like, but also there's the artists have a responsibility and they're accountable for how they present their work. And it seems like in this particular DIV, that's a question. And I don't mean that in a stern colonialist way, but in a way of like, because there are so many options open to them about how you are willing to curate this and represent them and have the festival represent them, they are kind of also now very, extremely responsible for how they go about doing that. And that, of course, any artist has that as part of their thinking to do. But I'm thinking even the people who use the theatre will be thinking about how they're using the theatre potentially in a different way because of these conversations. So, and also seeing how they can represent themselves and maybe in a more effective way through these conversations.
And we had a lot of dialogue around kind of, I mean, I think the previous DOVs have had this as well, but really wanting to like highlight the different stages of process as well as like finished products or finished work, you know, like, but really kind of stripping back to like allow the conversations, allow the playtime in the studio, allow the importance of like the rest time as well, you know, the time to like be stuck in that procrastination. Like those things are all part of what lead to us getting to the stage where we have these finished products that then, you know, can be shared on a wider platform. But, you know, we need to have that level of care and that level of focus on all the different stages involved and why they're important and why they're necessary to the journey of like arriving at a finished piece. It's like, it's important that we create a platform, or it was important to me that we created a platform where we could show works that aren't finished, but they may be at a stage where they're ready to have some eyes on it, and that's part of them testing out with an audience, and that's part of their exploration and feeling how it is with live bodies, like watching, you know, the audience are the other collaborators in the process. And so sometimes putting these things in spaces to be witnessed is part of you kind of learning how does it feel when it's alive, when there is like real people and energy being exchanged with like performers and audiences. And so, I just wanted to make sure we were allowing room for kind of discussions around work, sharings of work at different stages, and also artists at different stages. You know, not everyone is ready to be like in a main house theatre performing an evening length work, but there's a lot of people that maybe have shorter work or want to be in alternative spaces that also need kind of to connect with people internationally. They you know, it's like, it's not about waiting until you reach that level where you're now ready. It's about how can we share who we are, where we're at right now, and that be okay.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What about the Indigenous conversations and connections? I know that I've worked as an associate producer for Dance in Vancouver before, but I know that Indigidiv, as it's called, the side, kind of feel like it's very much integrated into it, and it's not really an annex of Dance in Vancouver. It very much is integrated into Dance in Vancouver. But could you maybe share some of the conversations you may have had with Star Marenko and Michelle Olsen and Raven Spirit Dance around the Indigenous side of the festival? Has that been something that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I've definitely had some conversation, and it's been lovely, like, to start to develop, you know, a rapport with them and start to get to know them. And again, just a lot of listening. Like, I come from a place that's very diverse and has a mix of different communities, but it's a different kind of crossover of communities, and it's a different thing to like people that inhabit the land to people that were like the indigenous community of the land, and you know, they've gone through this pathway of, you know, it being taken away from them and things that they lost and were stripped of, and now they're like coexisting in this space of like where they're at today. And I feel like, you know, I was just trying to get some understanding of their experience, and but at the same time, it's like I'm just getting to know them as people. You know, it's like all our conversations are not around what's it like to be Indigenous and what's your experience. Like, there was definitely some of that as well, but it's same as with everyone I've had conversations with. I was just trying to understand who they were and what, you know, the pathway they've taken with Raven Spirit and their previous experiences as well with Dance in Vancouver, and kind of trying to listen to like how they wanted to be involved this year and in what way. And I think, you know, it was I think very different to their previous experience, where they were very much co-curators, where they were happy to kind of curate something within Dance in Vancouver or within their programming, but to work. We talked a lot about like working within capacity of how much we all have to give and how much they have to give and how much they're like putting their energy into other work they're doing that's very important as well. And so like this is, you know, in terms of their internal kind of resources, what they have to offer to this platform and how they would like to utilize it. And so that was really, just trying to understand from their point, like where the ebb and flow is, or where they're like able to offer something or open up, and where they actually have to kind of create a parameter and say, this is what we can offer and this is what we can't, and kind of trying to discover the nuance of the conversation, because sometimes it's a lot about kind of what's not said as well as what is said,
Yeah, I was thinking exactly that. It's very important to hold the space open for that, right? To give space to that, which is, exactly what you're talking about. So is it worth talking about maybe some of the differences and similarities between the London UK scenes and what you've been able to connect to in Vancouver? Like, do you think we've covered that maybe? I wonder if there's something, like one of the things I just want to mention is that I've been doing Afrobeats with Isaac Kazangwa here, and I interviewed him for a previous podcast where he talked about, I want to come back to what you said, Freddie, about the professional and the amateur and those kinds of divisions not being like professional. They're not there in the same way in other cultures. And I found this like joy in dancing again and going back to classes and tap dancing and doing all of these things that I'm learning. I'm doing for pure pleasure. And I know I'll integrate them because I'm an artist and I'll integrate them into my works eventually. But I'm getting so much joy out of just going to discover something and I'm making a distinction. I'm saying I'm doing that kind of as my hobby so that there isn't pressure on me to show how good I'm doing, how good I am at it. But there's also another pressure, which is every time I go to these classes, everybody videos everything and posts them on Instagram. So I'm getting more coverage from the amateur things I'm doing than I am in my professional life in a weird way. And I don't mind. If I minded, I wouldn't be in it. But I've just realized that there's kind of this crazy thing that's happening where I've got a bigger social media profile from the classes I'm taking for fun as a professional dancer than I do in my professional work. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you. And it feels like a kind of timely thing for me in Vancouver that this is happening and that I've made this choice myself. But I just wondered if you wanted to speak to any of that, like maybe the social media world or maybe the amateur professional divide. And is this got something to do with why funding is being cut and all of these things? Like, do we see crossovers in all of this? I mean, it's just a big, wide open question, but really it's just a way to get under everything we're talking about in terms of stakes, I think, or what our milieu is or what we are working with now, both in a positive way and maybe in a challenge, the challenges we're facing. Is there anything in that?
I mean, there's this conversation about art and going to see art a way to escape. I think people are not escaping because they don't feel it's for them. They're not included. So I think this thing about the amateur and the professional is something I also really question as well. The skill, I mean, I always remember when I first started dancing in a Western context, the skill to be able to engage everyone from all abilities is the most important skill if you're working as an artist, because actually that's the point of the art. It's supposed to be able to communicate for everyone. Whether you all read the same narrative, that's completely different. And I think that's what we've more and more distanced one another from. Like, this is this is that, where there isn't a meeting place for that as well. And I mean, there's some of the editing that I see on social media, that's film, that's composition, that's choreography. I mean, the way and the memes and the things, I'm trying to get down with the young people, whatever terms they use. But it's honestly, I mean, I look at it going, this is modern day choreography. I mean, it's brilliant. And actually with the technology that they're working with, some of them is just their phones, I mean, I know we're getting more sophisticated phones, but the things that they can do on these little gadgets, instead of having a 15, once again, it's another craft to have a full production Hollywood blockbuster film, but these films also have an effect. I remember when the first Blair Witch Project came out, it was revolutionary. Now,
forget it.
For me, that conversation you're having about different forms coming up that's engaging the community, but it's also occupying more space across the world, it's a skill. And not many people within the arts that are being funded regularly now to do that. I mean, as an organisation, Dance Umbrella, we're really developing those skills as well with our digital content as well. But something I want to speak to as well, it might be nice to also mention them as well, something that author Anthea is brilliant at doing as well, which is really important, is that even though that this is a focused platform for British Columbia artists based in Vancouver in that way, but it's also having an international window and conversations, because it is also very international from the 2 periods that myself and Anthea have been, is very international, like the heritage of people based there as well. And where luckily Anthea and Dance Umbrella will be able to cultivate a relationship with Fabric International, who are based in the Midlands in the UK, to support 2 UK-based artists. There could be from anywhere in the world, to attend Dance in Vancouver. And I think for me, Anthea, speaking to not just having programmers, having peers, artists/producers in their spaces also has been very fruitful for me, like as a recommendation or feedback, because sometimes it's a bit easier to get that feedback from your peers in that way, instead of a programmer going, well, that's not for me. It's different sensibilities. And I think it's really important to create that international community. And I think for Dance Umbrella and for Fabric International, and also working Milner, who has that perspective, like traveling across the globe, and also working Raquel, who's been brilliant, just really understanding that even though there's a local platform, is really important. And we know what the parameters are, but it's really important to still not to lose sight that it's also trying to create those international communities. Because I mean, if it's an art form that's internationally translatable, it should be able to have that conversation as well. And actually, we know some of the artists from those spaces. I don't want to leave out any spaces once again as well, but all the spaces that Anthea's curating as well, there is that curiosity about what else is beyond this space as well. Not because it's better or worse, but what other conversations can we have that in dialogue? And I think it's so important for that growth and just widening. I use the phrase widen the center to really have a wider conversation of practice. I think that's something that Anthea's really got spot on as well. So that for me is as important as having international delegates that are specifically there to look at the work, to think about programming. Because just lastly, I always hear this thing, and I got so frustrated with it the first time I heard it, when I heard a producer programmer saying, yeah, I like to be at the beginning of the project, the ideation of it. And I'm like, you are never going to be at the beginning when an artist has an idea, having a sleepless night over it. So just go over yourself a bit. Sorry, it's just one. No, it's true. And I've heard it a few times. And actually, an artist, we kind of understand that when you're going, and I keep on saying this as well, many artists that are in the arts, if we were in the arts, we'd probably be in prison or something like that. Because actually, no, there's processing and having dialogue about, am I thinking this? Is this correct? Is this? And you can bounce ideas off that become relevant within a programmer's eye or something. And actually, another artist or producer can be like your sounding board to talk to a programmer. No, this is where they are with this idea, instead of always trying to find a product. I think this is the type of spaces that Anthea's really curated. I think it's going to be fruitful for people to be there, not just, where's the next work? Oh, damn, I didn't see a work I can program. I'm moving on. No, it's not just about that. There's a conversation that can be continued, and there's space for that. This is the be all and end all, this touch point.
I think that's wonderful. And I do have to say, I think having a freelance artist as a guest curator is so vital for what you're talking about, for understanding what it means to have peer-to-peer relations as artists. I think that I'm not saying that people who run companies don't also appreciate that, but it's different. The day-to-day engagement is very, very different, and can pull you out of those very intimate conversations that can be very quick to get to something quite artistically important. And I thank you so much for taking this on, Anthea and Freddie, and for coming. Doing it. And I'm just yeah, exactly. But both for initially doing it, Freddie, but now. Yeah, of course. So this has been incredible. Thank you so much for your time. Precious
Thank you for hosting this for us, Claire. We appreciate you guiding us through the conversation. It's really helpful.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, I think it's keeping it tight-ish is always kind of useful, isn't it? When you have to have so many conversations. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this will help other listeners find us and help us to grow our dance audience. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook at The Dance Centre, Twitter at Dance Centre, and Instagram at The Dance Centre BC. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation. Just go to our website at thedancecentre.ca, where you'll find extensive information about our upcoming programs and events. The music for the Dance Centre podcast was composed by James B. Maxwell. Always a pleasure to connect with you through dance. Until next time.